The spaceman is adrift.
That's symbolism right on the nose.
Does live the wrong life and die.
Speak the words before they're spoken.
Adrift in a stranger's galaxy for a long time.
Station 11.
That's Station 11, Doctor 11, like the 11 bodies.
That just gave me chills.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Mark and I are talking about Station 11, Episode 3 on Max, so spoilers are ahead. And if you're enjoying our content, a like would be appreciated. And if you don't want to miss a single one of our videos, then don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications. And with that, let's talk about Miranda and I think some of the kind of symbolism that's going on around here.
Well, I think this was, a great episode of we see Miranda gets into logistics and then is trying to figure out the logistics of getting out of Malaysia. That was...
Right.
I mean, that's symbolism right on the nose right there.
Yeah, and doing it by... So it seems like her company maybe ships by boat, and the company that acquired them maybe ships by air.
Sea and air, baby.
And it's but I do think that there is that, so she's got some history in sea, with her dad scrubbing boats, and I do think that there is some connection to water with this story and some other stuff kind of going on. Like the symbol is an anchor, the symbol that's tattooed on Kirsten, that's also made up of like the twigs.
Yeah, which the symbol means cut and run. It's a cut and run symbol.
Right.
So are all of those tattoos on Kirsten times that she's had to cut and run?
That's because there are more than one.
Right. So like maybe she had to cut and run from her family. Maybe she had to cut and run from Frank and Jeevan. And
Frank,
each one of those are a cut and run situation.
Ooh, I like that. And that's a sad way to then have to, or like a way to remember that stuff, right, and have it live on. I really like that. But it does kind of make me wonder about the purpose of the spaceman suit and whether or not, once again, it is related to water. Because did you see in the recap this time, did you see the water above him?
Yeah, I did. Well, okay, so I think we get a glimpse of what Station 11 or what Dr. 11 is about through Elizabeth explaining to the group of people, like, it's a person that has survived tragedy and feels alienated in the world. And I am leaning more to that being a dive suit because, like you said, her father was a diver. Well, he cleaned boats, which you would assume, right, that you would be on scuba diving to clean those boats without pulling them out of the water. And she'd sailed around the world. And I'm thinking that her dad died in Hurricane Hugo. And Dr. 11 is her maybe embodiment of her father, who, because she's telling Arthur at one point about Hurricane Hugo, like as she's talking about his diving background or his boat sailing background. And so when she tells him that, she starts to talk about Hurricane Hugo, and she looks like upset, and she's like, I gotta go. And I believe she lost her father, and that's the tragedy that she's speaking of. And so Dr. 11 is either her dealing with that tragedy or her father.
I like that. I remember that. I didn't catch that,
Yeah.
I definitely believe that. I could definitely see that.
And because, like, if you also look at the symbolism, so she says, Elizabeth talks about it's tragedy and feeling alienated. And she has pretty much alienated herself from Arthur. Once they move to California, all she does is spend time in the pool house just working on this Dr. 11 story, whatever it may be. So she has alienated herself in this world, and that's because she has dealt with that tragedy. That's how I took it.
Interesting. So I think that there is plenty of other kind of symbolism. I thought it was interesting that she gets into logistics, and at one point there's a line about something like you'll know the end point when you get to it.
Right.
And I think that that to me sounded like that was less of a business thing and more of a life thing. And she does say to Arthur, unfortunately, kind of shortly before he dies, that she will find him somehow.
Yes.
It seems like there is definitely a story of travel that like the spaceman is adrift, so that clearly has to do with kind of travel, and I think is trying to get to a destination.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly how to put all of this together, but it still feels like Miranda has more journey in her story.
You think so? I
I definitely think so.
I do think it was really hard to interpret that final scene where she's locking herself in the hotel room and she opens the door and sees Dr. 11, which I like that it's Dr. 11 because it is ambiguous whether it is male or female
Male or female?
under
Yes.
that helmet. So, and then she
Up.
opens it up. We see Dr. 11 walk through. I couldn't tell if that was her leaving, basically dying in this world, joining Dr. 11, and that when she says she's going to find Arthur again, she's lost him 9 or maybe 10 times, and so she's going to find him the 11th time. I'm wondering if she means because she's going to die and go find him, and that's the end of Miranda's story. Like, we might get a little bit more flashback, but I feel like she could be dead.
I did not put something together until I just heard you say it. She says, that she's found you 9 times before, maybe 10, and I'll find you again, which she didn't explicitly say this, but hearing you say it is the 11th time.
Right. Station 11.
That's Station 11, Doctor 11, like the 11 bodies that I kind of saw on that diagram. I don't think that 11th time is necessarily just in heaven or something like that.
Right.
I think there is something more to that.
I hope so. That would be pretty cool. Going back to that logistics of like you'll know when you get to the end point. I also think that
Yes.
is a very neat way to describe her journey with creating this story of Dr. 11. Because if you look when she was in the pool house, she's constantly editing and drawing, and she says that I'm never going to publish this work. She says, I don't know when it's going to be finished. I can't show anybody till it's finished, till it gets to that end point. And then after she burns down the pool house, burns down most of her work, she goes and works on it and gets it published. She got it to that end point logistically.
Right. It's interesting. So you said that when she said the quote about, I found you 9 times before,
Mm-hmm.
that she was talking to or about Arthur. I think potentially she's talking to Dr. 11,
Hmm.
because it does seem like she can't get him out of her head, We saw quotes from this in 2005 as she's going into the interview. She's voicing over parts from the book. We're seeing like bits and pieces of actual things that happen in her life, like when Arthur says he doesn't want to live the wrong life and die, which I think seems very appropriate, because I think that fear of wanting to live the wrong life potentially was what caused him to go to somebody else. But then in the end, I think he maybe made the wrong choice, and then does live the wrong life and die.
So hear me out.
But
Arthur builds
yes.
a box, and in this box, he takes this box and he goes back to the time when no, just we won't tread on that.
But it does seem like, you know, she burned down everything that she had, and then she still ended up picking the story back up.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like And even when she publishes the, or not publish, even when she, like physically makes a copy, she still sees him. There's so much going on that I don't understand. That I have all these little pieces of information that I want to get to what their meaning are.
Okay, so when she talks about love, right? Is she talking about love between her and Arthur, or is she talking about love between her and Doctor 11, as in the story of Doctor 11? Like, it does seem like when she's talking about love at first, she is talking about Arthur and how this love should be, working out and, you know, speak the words before they're spoken, and then she starts talking about love again and she runs into Dr. 11. So I'm curious what you think about her interpretation of love.
That's one of those things that I have the information of all the words, but I can't put together where exactly it goes. Love is a calamity, to be loved is a calamity. Really don't know. I've been trying to kick this one around and figure out what some of these things mean, and I just can't quite get to them.
Yeah, I don't love. Like, okay, so I do have a problem with, I think, Arthur and her love. Because Arthur does, as an actor, he does kind of have these selfish tendencies, right? And I think that, like, when he tells Kirsten, he's like, that's the asshole that ruined my life. I think that he sees it from a perspective of that this guy that she couldn't stop, or this Dr. 11 that she couldn't stop drawing, she couldn't stop working on him, created this, like, space between them that made him cheat on her. Not taking responsibility for his actions, of he was the one that actually made the faux pas of cheating on Miranda to actually end it. So, like, he doesn't take a lot of accountability in their failed relationship. Miranda knew it was temporary, but he didn't think it was temporary, but yet he was the one that ultimately created, like, yeah, you could say that Dr. 11 created the rift between them, of her constantly needing to work on it, but he was the one that took the action.
Why did Miranda think that it was always going to be temporary?
I think it was always going to be temporary in her mind because of who Arthur is. Like, you see Arthur, he took the action to start speaking with Miranda. Like, he's a very
Mm-hmm.
bold person. We then, cut to them at the place that they were staying a little bit longer at Clark's birthday, and she's talking with Clark. He's talking to the owner, schmoozing the owner. He seems, and we see at the red carpet, he's talking to the reporters, and she is again alienated from this lifestyle. So I think in her mind, she always knew that this, like, Arthur couldn't be held down, really, and that he would never ultimately want to be with Amanda because she's not of his world.
That's interesting. I also kind of wonder if some of it is that has to do with that feeling of cutting loose, of fearing a storm and being ready to just cut and run
Right.
versus trying to weather it out. So if she always is waiting for the other shoe to drop and she's willing to leave at extreme measures versus
Work on the
really trying
problems.
to, yes.
Right. Instead of working on the problem of alienating herself from Arthur, working on that, because you can see Arthur is frustrated, even before we get
Right.
any inclination that he's cheating. Like, he is frustrated,
Yeah.
and that's probably has a lot to do with it.
And I get that you're saying that when he says that asshole ruined my life, that he's not taking accountability. But she has a very similar thought because she said, I think that book ruined my life. So they both kind of have an understanding of that. I loved when you were talking about how Miranda never quite fit into his world, because that to me is that line, adrift in a stranger's galaxy for a long time.
Oh, you just gave me chills. I didn't even think about that part, but that just gave me chills. Ooh, yeah. I mean, and also it does seem, because remember they're having the conversation about Alpha and Beta, and she's like, I don't like movies. I don't watch movies. And he even said, like,
Hmm.
I didn't think you watched any of my movies because
Right.
she never fit in that bubble.
Yeah.
Being adrift in a stranger's galaxy. She does best when she's escaping.
Yeah.
And that's another, she talking about she does best when she's escaping. And we see her escaping Arthur because of what he has done, but also her trying to escape the flu, and she didn't do a great job escaping,
Right.
unfortunately.
It's interesting. I think when Arthur first meets her and then does an interpretation of her work, I think he is surprisingly accurate because I think it's easy to focus on the fact that Dr. 11 looks like a spaceman, but he calls out the fact that it's not really a spaceman, it's a person, and then talks about the qualities of that person. And I think that right now Dr. 11 looks very much like a symbol, but I think that whether or not Dr. 11 is real or just representative of something, I think that Dr. 11 is very human, is
Yeah.
dealing with very human things.
Well, I think so. Is Dr. 11 the essence of Miranda dealing with this tragedy? Because he says that this person is adrift alone, they're not unhappy, but
Right.
all of their metrics are okay because they are covered by a spacesuit. Like
Right.
this coat of armor. Like Miranda has this tough
Mhm.
armor shell that is stopping her from getting close to anyone, to being in worlds with anyone, because she is alienated by this tragedy. Even though she's doing fine, she still has this lingering pain that is always haunting her.
Right.
Well, I
Good.
think this is a good opportunity to jump into some more filmmaking techniques, because, man, this show is just chock full of great moments. And one specifically that I would like to talk about, and this might be one that you notice as well. But after she has followed Arthur into the party, she's talking with Clark. There is a somber piano music playing, right? And after she finds out about the flu, this was such a great line. We hear the somber piano music playing as she's trying to, the same music as she's trying to call Arthur, and she says, "You are my yesterday," which
Mm.
also can bleed into the symbolism a bit, where Arthur was her
Yeah.
yesterday, like in her life, but also because of the time difference of Malaysia and Chicago, he's living in the past, and so it was playing the music of when I think that she, well, one, when she was drawing the cut and run symbol,
Yeah.
and she even says, maybe I acquired him, and you were my yesterday. I thought that was just such a beautiful, touching moment, and heartbreaking all at the same time, because we know that Arthur unfortunately did not make it.
Right. I didn't catch that. That's great.
Yeah.
I loved how I know that this isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I actually did like the jumping around. I
Mm.
think it is to a certain extent it is disorienting. It can make a story harder to follow, but it also can give you very interesting insights and connections between things that are very distant apart, in terms of time. And I think that as things kind of come together and you do have to focus to kind of pay attention, it does give you kind of moments as you start to figure out how the pieces kind of fit together. So I feel like it is a tough style, but it can be very rewarding when done well.
And I do think it was done well in this episode, showing, like, I think her escaping Malaysia and then her relationship with Arthur, both feeling alienated in both scenarios. I feel like it did add to the story, jumping around and seeing present day. And we still don't know if Miranda escapes. Even now we still don't
Right.
know if she is somebody that makes it, through the flu. This is still on the table, and so the stakes being set of her trying to get out of Malaysia, they feel really high and they feel attainable. Like it feels like we can get out of this situation.
Right. It's wild that in these 3 episodes, I feel like each one has been given its own space to do what it needs to do, and is
Mm.
told its own type of story, used its own filmmaking techniques. They like this feels very different from the previous 2 episodes,
Yeah.
but without feeling like it doesn't belong. It definitely feels like it's part of that story,
Yeah.
but it is very different, and it does feel like it is able to tell the story it needs in the way it needs to, and it doesn't have to have the connective tissue of being filmed the same way as the other. Like each one has felt very unique, and I am enjoying that style.
Yeah. It almost seems like each one of these so far could be their own little vignettes.
Own little
Basic.
film. Yeah, yes,
Just
yes.
like we have an apocalypse, we have post-apocalypse, we have somebody that wrote a book that had a misconnection of love, and
Right.
but yet they're all tied together. There is glue, which it whether it be this book or Arthur, I forget his last name, Leander,
Leander.
Arthur Leander. There are all these connective tissues to these stories, but all self-contained. All these little episodes that could work well on their own. Like you could have a full story on just these episodes.
This is there's very little way that this is connected, but I don't feel like I hear the name Leander very often, and I just realized that Leander is a sad story from Greek and Roman mythology of Hero and Leander, in which they're two lovers. I think she might be Hero, and I think she lives on an island or something like that, maybe like a lighthouse or something like that. And one night when she goes out to him, there's a it's in the water. There's a big storm, and her ship is lost, and so Leander loses her. But there are I haven't heard it in a long time, so I'm maybe missing some of the details. But there are some interesting parallels, and this show does show that it likes classics like Hamlet.
Right?
In fact, there's Hamlet is actually featured very heavily in this. We
Yeah.
saw Hamlet in the second episode being performed. We find out that these two, Arthur and Clark, portrayed Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two characters from Hamlet. The next episode is entitled Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Not Dead, which is a funny play off of a kind of an existential play called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Like I said, probably the Hero Leander thing is probably unrelated, but
I
it
mean,
is
it might not
interesting. The
be.
idea of like ships, storms, and Leanders, and loss,
And loss of love.
and right, yes,
I mean that I feel like that checks out, in my book at least. It's interesting that also Miranda seems weirdly clairvoyant, which is
yes,
odd. Cuz when she's getting the job with
or we'll be dead in 20 years.
yeah, so like that was 15 years before the pandemic. So either working for you, and clearly she was still working in logistics with him,
Mm-hmm.
or we'll all be dead. Like, she predicted that. And when they're talking about the Guildenstern, Rosencrantz, my bad. She says, well, you both end up the same way anyway, dead. And
Yes.
we already know Arthur's dead, and assuming that this flu is as terrible as it is, we know that Clark is about to get on a plane to go to a memorial. So I do feel like we're gonna see that they both die. I don't think this is the end of Clark's story either.
I could see that. See that.
One last thing that I would
Okay.
like to talk about was a few shots that they showed a couple times
Yes.
where how they depicted the pool house with Arthur's house. There was always the same shot from the distance, and I felt like that was such a cool shot that showed the distance between Miranda and Arthur before we were told about the distance between Miranda and Arthur. And they ended it after Miranda leaves with her lighting the pool house on fire, showing even further distance between them as Arthur runs towards the flaming pool house. But it's that same shot of showing that distance, and I thought that was a beautiful way showing the distance between them through just a shot.
That is. I also like the fact that they brought in the flames for a moment much earlier before they actually got to that scene. And I don't remember exactly when it happened, but I think it was showing some of like the pain that she's dealt with.
Well, yeah, because it showed Miranda leaving and Elizabeth was sleeping on the couch, and she gets up and sees the reflection of the burning pool house.
No, I'm talking about in an earlier scene.
Oh.
There's in a much earlier scene.
Yes.
They show it for just like a moment, and it just seems like like it's representative of raging emotions.
Right.
You know, and you don't have the context of knowing that that's a real fire that you know.
Right.
So you get more context kind of watching it a second time around.
Right. I do remember that. It was right before she wakes up at his grandma's house.
Yeah.
We see the flames out of context.
You know, it's interesting this episode. I feel like using this kind of technique where it's jumping around a lot, so it's kind of disorienting. I feel like things like that aren't necessarily shot sequential or shown sequentially. I think that they often benefit from a second viewing. And I'm not saying that this one didn't, but normally I feel like that second viewing is illuminating.
Agreed.
And you have kind of a moment. I definitely very much enjoyed watching this a second time through, and I definitely feel like I was able to have a better understanding of what happened, but it didn't feel like it was built to give you any kind of real larger clarity. Once again, I don't think that was bad. I very much enjoyed it, and I enjoyed watching it a second time, but I did think it was interesting that there wasn't any kind of like light bulb moment of, you watch Memento a second time, and it's like, oh, it all makes sense now that I know what the end is,
Right. I do, like, with our previous show that we watched, Dark Matter, I didn't feel like I got a lot out of the second watch. There is a lot of what you see is what you get, but
yes,
watching these episodes second time, finding the deeper connections, there is so many metaphors and what is going on, and like metaphors of writing a story, and metaphors of what Miranda's going through and what Arthur is going through, and it's so full of them that it is rewarding to watch it a second time.
Yes. I think that's what it is. I feel like more often than not, rewatching it, I'm seeing details rather than reveals. So it's not necessarily likely that I'm finding a huge breadcrumb that's like, oh my goodness, that means this and this and this. Instead, it's like, oh, that's an interesting kind of metaphor for this, or that's a really nice touch. Like it is, I think it's allowing me to enjoy the work more without necessarily opening the curtains as to what's going to happen next.
Right. No, and I'm loving the show. I think it's awesome.
There's a bit of a potential throwaway that I think might actually have some connection, which is when Arthur is talking about one of his bad movies, and he describes it as being a two-hander. He asks her if she knows what a two-hander is, and he says, when two people need to solve the same problem, which to me was a very weird wording. It wasn't when two people work together to solve the same problem. it sounded like it was worded that way for a specific reason, maybe so that it could be applied later on or something along those lines.
Like that maybe Station 11 itself is a two-hander where
That,
two people are trying to solve
yes,
the same problem.
potentially.
Interesting. I wonder if that's referring, if it stays in that time space, is it going to be Miranda and Clark solving the same problem at the same time? Or is it going to be like Kirsten and Miranda saving the same problem at the same time?
Right,
Ooh, ooh, ooh. Or Kirsten and Jeevan. Maybe we're in a two-hander
right.
right now.
I like the Kirsten Miranda idea
Okay.
because once again the wording of it was a little weird to me because I feel like it should be working together to solve the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me that, could work with two people that are separated, whether it's via like space or time, so like Kirsten separated by time working to solve the same problem.
Gotcha. Oh, wow. Yeah, I could see Station 11 just because this show has been so full of whether the Leander theory is correct about being mythology, about Hamlet, even Shakespeare in general. I could see this being another way, a cheeky way of saying this is a two-hander, this show that we're watching.
Right.
I like that. I like that. I'm excited to see.
Do you think? Okay, so I had a theory last week. I had a theory last week that that the way that David, the way that David knew about stuff from the book was potentially because Jeevan, Frank, somebody like that was around and had told the story, and so it was through like an oral tradition that this was passed on, and that's how it happened. We do know now that there are more than two copies because she did say she gave him a second one and she said that she had more. He was supposed to give that to Tyler and it's possible he still did. So, do you think that this copy kind of came through Tyler's hands and eventually onto David and other people?
Or
Or do
is
you still think it's possible that she even described things?
I don't know how. I don't feel like it's Jeevan. I could see the other copy being coming into play. I could even see David being Tyler. And maybe, I don't know, that cuz it does seem, he mentioned coming from up north, which was clearly a lie because he didn't know Chicken of the Woods, he didn't know the name of the island. So, yeah, so maybe this is Tyler going under a different name. David is, synonymous with the Bible, so maybe he's under an alias. I don't know. I think he found a copy as well, and so I think that because the show is really rich with detail, I think it could be Arthur Leander's son. And he would
Okay.
probably know about Kirsten from Arthur Leander because it was 10 days before and he was working with Kirsten and she had an Instagram and he could know her from the before times. And they're about that
Yeah.
similar age.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That's my
Okay.
theory.
I like that.
But with that, I think our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining along with us. Come back next week. We will be doing Station 11, Episode 4. Until then, I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.